What's going on, everybody? Adam from South Harmon Fantasy Football here to bring to you again another really dope episode this week. Today, I really want to take a trip down memory lane, kind of go over the journey and how in which we got the team that I currently have in this Dynasty League to the point that it is, and kind of taking a look at all the things and processes along the way that I think are really important to talk about. Mike and I do a really good job, I think, in talking about strategies in general and what we think about why we would do this, or why we would quarterback order, or why we would go ahead and take more pick leverage. And while we say that, it's kind of like giving you a stroke or a piece of the canvas where you can see some of it, but you don't really get to see the entire body of work. And I think from the visual standpoint, going through and showing you kind of the whole POV of my team currently and how really we got there, while you can definitely focus on some of the players that are going to be like absolutely terrible, catastrophic in dynasty value, or vice versa. Maybe they're going to go up seismically. Don't focus too much on that specific part of it. It's very easy to do, and there's going to be a lot of sticker shock one way or the other. Conceptualize things, right? Kind of the quarterback hoarding mentality that we talk about and kind of how I implemented it here. The market in 2021, when I started this startup, was different than it is currently today. So kind of bringing all these things to the forefront and putting together in front of you kind of this journey. And, let's take a trip down the yellow brick road. Let's take a look at what we got. So this league is the shit league that I'm going to get into here with today. While this is technically a flex, I want to do this with a lot of other different teams I have for you. I think it's going to be a good way to kind of give you a little more insight into some of the strategies that we talk about here at South Harmon. And if you're not subbed to the channel, make sure you go down and hit that sub button right now, because we have a total dope squad ready to come bring to you content literally every single day right now for the 2024 season, which is fastly approaching. But before we get into that, you already know what we got to do. Brian, hit that intro for me, man.
40 chess, yeah, 40 chess, 40 chess, let's get it.
Yo, is that T-Dog?
40 chess, 40 chess, ay, 40 chess, this a trade show, Patreon where the trades go, tap in and watch, that's what you came for, ain't gotta say my name, they know my name, bro.
What's good, man?
We got McNutted in ATM, always start off the show with a trade from them, you should always make sure that your trade is in, Patreon, why not be a Patreon, know you wish you could spend every day with them, tap in and say what you gon' say with them, South Harmon can fill up a stadium, next time you log in, make sure that you bring a friend, we about to kick off, let the day begin, go follow the socials, 40 Chess FF is posted, if your trade is an F, you get roasted, go like and subscribe for the crew, Apple, Spotify, and the YouTube, you know Cooper got the walk too, let us give you a walkthrough, 40 Chess, this is 40 Chess.
All right, so let's get straight into this. And this is the OG Shit League. So this is the original Shit League, the very first one we started when Mike and I started the Patreon back in 2021. We called it South Harmon Institute of Technology. And the whole idea was really, shit. And it was really more so a joke than anything. We just wanted to kind of bullshit about football and talk about it on a podcast form, more so just, talking to mics, act like we knew what the hell we were talking about. But we did that back in 2021. And we actually had, a few people that followed the brand. Mostly definitely shitheads, a bunch of crazy people. And maybe that's why this team looks so good. Nah, but I want to go through some of the different teams that I have. This one, I think it's easy when you take a look at the team. Like if I show this to people, I don't really do that typically, but if you're looking at my leagues and you say, okay, this team right here, how in the hell did you get there? And I think it just makes sense when you really look at this team. This is definitely going to be I think I have 2 or 3 teams that are absolutely loaded, like goon squads, I call them. But this one would be the best of the bunch. So I just want to go over the team here with you where it's at currently, and then talk through how we got here. And really, when you take a look at the whole process, you can talk about quarterback hoarding, pick leverage hoarding, basically in the startup right away. And then also you can see that there was plenty of times along the way where I made some pretty crazy moves and some boneheaded things took place, or just, I got unlucky with some of my trades. So it kind of should highlight to you with this absolutely ridiculous team that you don't have to win every single trade. So more so just focusing on the team as it stands currently, and really kind of taking a look at how we got there and a lot of the processes that I think they're important to highlight along the way, and then some learning points for even myself at this point. So right now, what I'm going to do is go ahead and pull up the screen share for you. All right, there we go. Okay, so you take a look at this team, right? So this is a Start 13 best ball league. and it is obviously super flex. So right now we have Josh Allen currently at my quarterback 1. I have Bijan and Breece Hall at the running back 1 and running back 2 spot. I have Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, AJ Brown at the wide receiver 1, 2, and 3. I have Noah Fant, won the title last year with Noah Fant as really the only tight end in this league that has any sort of consequence. And he was terrible last year, frankly. So you got Garrett Wilson at the flex spot next, Jahmyr Gibbs, Cooper Kupp, Isaiah Pacheco, Stephon Diggs, and then Anthony Richardson on the bench. So if you look last year, A-Rich was hurt as well as Kirk Cousins. I basically had Bryce Young, who was stringing along a bunch of nothing weeks. Then you get Kamara, Devontae Smith, the Slim Reaper. I got Rashad White, Devon Achane, James Conner, Zay Flowers, Jerome Ford, Jordan Addison, Aaron Jones, Tyler Lockett, Raheem Mostert. I got Zamir White, Gabe Davis, Khalil Herbert, Jalen Hyatt, Tank Bigsby, RIP. And then I got some guys I need to clean up here actually on the bottom. So this is another good thing for me to like make sure I'm keeping up with some of my teams. I basically put it on record. If you were to go back and look at or listen to in the podcast feed, highly detailed. I want to get back to that podcast at some point, but I'm not going to half-ass that. It's really more of a passion project for me. And I talked about how for me this year I found that I was in too many leagues overall, because I'm going to be someone that always is going to put the content creation and talking about not just the leagues that I'm in, but also trying to help other people win their leagues. I'm going to end up prioritizing that. And I found that out. I mean, I probably knew that, but I found out the hard way that there were some teams that I definitely didn't pay enough attention to. So this year, this will actually probably help me also make sure that I'm not just talking the talk, walking the walk as well. So a couple of guys I got to clean off the bench here, but you take a look at this team. Really though, the other thing is at this point, I don't have my 25, first, second, third, but I have all my 26 and 27 picks. So just in general, that team's loaded top to bottom, right? But I think while you see that and you're like, what? Who the hell are these people? Now, granted, I mean, I will admit to you, I don't really know who these people are. They're a bunch of shitheads. No, these are my dogs. But that's part of it. But really, the one thing I was. And while that's where it looks like today, right, there's a lot of things that I got lucky or got right along the way and some things that I avoided. But what I want to do is go back and go back to the beginning of time as far as the league goes, right? And I think if you get a better picture and sense of how we really got here, you can at least kind of understand some of the processes that we talk about a little better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just pull up the draft board here first. And then from the draft, you can kind of see kind of what happened in the league, right? And then from there, what I want to do is actually I'm going to be basically going back and forth between my transactions for this year as well as the draft and talking through some things that I think are important to note. So in this draft, right, so I got Christian McCaffrey coming off the 101 here, but my pick is not until the 110. So I have the 110 and it goes to roster baiter, okay? I'm going to show you the details of the trade. But basically, I traded out of the 110 in this draft and I traded back to, I believe it was, right here. So I get I get his 310 and I also get his 510, I believe it was. I ended up moving the 510. That's why Memo's name's on it. But I got the 310 and the 510 and a 25 first. Sorry, not 25, a 23 first. And then I sent him my 8th round pick, which was, I believe it was, right here, the Robert Woods pick that he makes, right? So I sent him the 110 and the 8th round pick for a third, like the 310, the 510, and the 23 first. Now, at this time, we still didn't really know the depths and truly how much depth you'll need in a format like this where it's best ball star 13. But I did definitely know that going into this year, I wanted to really get a lot more depth if I could. But in this league in general, I knew how much everybody wanted to win the inaugural shit league. I'm okay waiting. I'll wait my time, So I almost leaned into the fact that you don't have to try to win right away. And you can actually nuclear rebuild. And I almost wanted to do it because it's the OG shit league, set it off the right way. I leaned into it. I basically was kind of willing to, when I had the opportunities in front of me, pivot out of value, willing to tear it down for a year or two, whatever it needed to be, to really kind of build this thing back up the right way. All right, so what I want to do here, because the board eventually gets a little bit messy after all these trades are said and done, I'm going to go ahead and go back to some of the transactions and then kind of piece together for you so you can see what actually happens here. So when I go back to the league, what I'm going to do is actually go to the league and then transactions. I'm going to filter out for the visual of it, the trades that I made, and then also basically filtering out for just my team so that you can kind of see. I believe I made 10 trades I was just going over this briefly beforehand. I believe I made 10 trades during the startup time, essentially. So let's start at the bottom. Started from the bottom, now we here, right? And shout out to Maddie for Drake. So we got the first trade I told you here with roster baiter. So like I said, I sent away my 21 first, which is the 110, and then also my 8th round pick. That goes to Cody. He took, as you saw there, Robert Woods with the 8th round pick, and then the first was Alvin Kamara at the 110. Obviously, what we think of the running back position in general, a lot different then than it is currently. So try to just, while the positional, advantages and what people thought about, certain strategies, they definitely are not currently today what they were then. Try to just focus overall on some of the more root principles here, I guess. So I'm basically going here for a tier down, letting him tier up to the position he wants or the player he wants. But I'm getting a 3rd and a 5th round pick, even though later 3rd and later 5th, also getting a 23 first future liquidity. So that tier down there, next trade I make was with Memo. So I end up sending here, I basically take on his future draft capital at this point for a 21 5th round pick. So that was my 5th round pick, but actually, no, I'm sorry. This is a roster baiter. So that pick that I got in the prior trade, now I sent away just that pick on its own for 22 first and 22 second. So now if you just think about that, right? I basically went from the 1st round to the 3rd round, and I got now 2 additional 1st round picks in the future, as well as a 2nd round picks. So this one here is a combination of a couple things, but basically leaning into future draft capital, letting people that wanted to kind of compete go ahead and do so by any means necessary. And then also you'll see that this was a quarterback horde. I'm going to show you one more trade here as well. So this is actually where I'm trading now. I'm getting a 1st and a 2nd from Memo. So now I've basically taken Memo's 1st and 2nd in 22 and 2023. I send him my 7th round pick in 2021, as well as some future 3rd and 4th. So it was basically a 1st and a 3rd. It was basically a 1st and a 2nd for just a 7th round pick and a 3rd and a 4th. Now, this is where I think without the context, you're going to be looking at that like, why would you send a 1st and a 2nd for a 7th? This is where the quarterback horde that, maybe it doesn't work as much now. It definitely can. I've seen it still work, but it definitely worked this time, at least to what I was trying to do. And then what's really interesting about this in particular is that when you look at the league, right? When you look at the draft in this league for the initial one, it's really crazy to see. Okay. All right. So when you take a look at this, right? So I get off of the Alvin Kamara pick at the 110. My first pick actually is the 2nd round. So I get the 203. I take Trey Lance, buying into the 49er hype of Trey Lance. RIP, as you know today. Try to focus more on just the overall principles than necessarily the players. So then I don't get a pick until now the 303, which is also my pick. In the 3rd round reversal, I take Justin Fields. So I got some big home run hitting winners when Justin Fields and Trey Lance. At this point, then I kind of deviate from the quarterback horde. And at this point, remember, I'm being flexible. I think in general, we talk about in startups being flexible. So I just figured those are the 2 best players in my current rankings at the time. RIP to those rankings. But those 2 quarterbacks just made more sense. And I wasn't necessarily leaning into a quarterback horde here. I wasn't necessarily guaranteeing that was going to be the case. I take A.J. Brown here in the middle of the 3rd with the pick that I acquired from Cody, roster baiter. And then now at the 310, again, looking around and seeing all the different skill players coming off the board and seeing, Deshaun Watson out there, who at this point, we hadn't seen him play as bad as he has lately, and the sentiment around him was basically just all off the field stuff. But when he's going to be back on the field, everyone thought he was going to play, really high caliber football and fantasy like he had in the past with Houston. So I make that pick now. And at this point, you're kind of, at least if I'm where I'm at, I'm not necessarily in a quarterback horde, but I'm certainly willing to continue to push the button on the quarterbacks if they're going to be there, because at this point now I have 3, right? I've taken 3 quarterbacks in the first 3 rounds with 4 picks, and you just look at it and you're like, obviously if I can get some skill players and I get people to start reaching or at least pressing the button on the quarterbacks, they start falling off the board, great. But if they don't do that and they're going to continue to lean into the skill players while I'm taking all these quarterbacks, it's time to make them feel the pain. And I think that's the whole idea with the quarterback horde. Now, again, to the levels in which you want to do it in the format, that's all up to you. But in a quarterback horde in general, you got to be willing to essentially be not a part of the contention, at least for a year, if not longer. Because if you go into it with a mindset of competing too soon, you're going to be the one that caves and not the other way around. So now, in the 4th round, right? So the 4th round, we're going back the other way. I don't get on the clock until the 410. It's so funny now what we think of Arthur Smith and Ryan Tannehill, but there was a lot of buzz around Ryan Tannehill and Arthur Smith, RIP, and I get Ryan Tannehill at the 410. So now it comes back around the other way. Brady comes off the board as well as Tua, but there's a guy named Jalen Hurts sitting there, and I finally make the first really good pick of my draft. I got AJ Brown. I actually get AJ Brown, and I get Jalen Hurts here. So I take Jalen Hurts, and now at this point, like, we're committed, right? And what's kind of amazing, typically, like in quarterback hordes, I don't do them as often anymore because the market just isn't the same as it once was. So I will say to exercise caution and definitely make sure that you have the stones to do so if you're going to go ahead and do a quarterback horde. But typically, you start to see some, movement in at least a combination of two things: awareness at what's happening with the quarterbacks that are coming off the board, especially to one team. But then also, like, even if there's not a run, let's say, like, eventually you typically with the quarterback horde will create a run of quarterbacks. But even if it's not a full run, like, you'll start to see some of the quarterbacks come off in a little more of a, I don't want to say full on panic, but you start to see a sense of urgency at least. So after the Jalen Hurts pick, again, a lot of skill players coming off. You got Baker Mayfield still at Cleveland, comes off in the 5th, and then Zach Wilson comes off at the 5-12. Now we get into the 6th round here. By the way, that pick there, Allen Robinson, that was traded to Memo for a 1st and a 2nd. That's the player that he elected to draft at that spot. I got the 1st and 2nd, 22. Moving forward, then we get into the 6th round. So then moving forward here, we get in the 6th round. We got a lot of receivers and running backs come off the board after Daniel Jones, again leaving a bunch of quarterbacks here. Between Mac Jones, Kirk Cousins, Matt Ryan, Sam Darnold, Carson Wentz, a bunch of clucks, and between all these guys, a bunch of duds and guys that just aren't that good. I take Mac Jones. Not the correct choice, but that's who I take, leaning into the quarterback horde as well. So now Mike, who is, very aware of the quarterback horde and seeing what's happening, does not want to have to basically deal with having to come get quarterbacks from me at some point. And at this point, even the lower end quarterbacks, they were scoring more in the 2021 season, and the way that we thought of the position overall, basically even these middling to, middle of the road, like these middle of the road quarterbacks or low end quarterbacks even, they had more weight, and it basically felt like if you didn't have a quarterback 2 that was more rock solid, or at least a guy that's going to be starting week in and week out, made you feel a little more vulnerable. So with Kirk Cousins, Matt Ryan, Sam Darnold coming off in those 3 picks, started to create a little mini run. Deontay comes off next, and then I take Carson Wentz. And then at this point, what you'll see here, now all these names, I know it sounds really bad. I get it. We'll get into the, some of the details here, but basically Derek Carr, Jared Goff, Ryan Fitzpatrick, and Jimmy G come off now at the 801. And the reason that's important to note, okay, at this point now, everybody here that you're going to see below, so like Big Ben, at this point, like going into the 2021 season, he's on his last leg. Jordan Love is obviously backup. We got Jameis Winston. He was a backup at this point. Taysom Hill. All these guys are backups. So none of these players are projecting to have a role at the quarterback position. And what you're seeing is because I have all these quarterbacks and now the pool is completely dried up of any real starters, there's a big gap, right? None of the quarterbacks come off from 802 all the way down to the 1003. So that's a full 2 rounds with all these quarterbacks off the board, but no one's drafting them. And basically at this point, there was a movement where people that were already committing picks into trades, not having quarterbacks. See, there was a combination of 2 things happening. One, if you're competing and you're trying to send your futures in, or if you do that, you're now kind of locked into making sure your team's good to go. See, I have the flexibility of having the picks and not caring if I win, because I'm probably, if anything, trying to just make sure I secure that 101 spot. If you have already sent your picks away and you don't want to make them early, obviously, but you ultimately are trying to win, you can't not have a quarterback. At least that's the fear or the mentality out there. And essentially what I'm doing is now at this point, because I'm flexible and because I'm willing to take on picks or whatever people don't care about or least value, I'm in this flexible position. And what I end up doing is essentially turning a lot of these quarterbacks into just future draft capital liquidity. And I basically start just casting off any piece of dynasty value on this team as far as players go, putting them into future draft picks. And by doing that, see, the 4D chess move there is basically that you get almost everybody in the league to try to go and compete. And while everybody would probably prefer to try to go and compete, it's impossible for everyone to compete. It's impossible for everyone to win. So you're also inherently picking up early firsts without having to really care who's winning and who's losing. You just kind of get to sit back and let the picks accrue value. So at this point, that combination with the quarterback horde and putting them into futures, people now at this point are starting to really trade with me on a frequent basis. Basically, it's like a fire sale. I've created a fire sale where everybody wants to make sure they get their quarterback that they need on their team. So let's go ahead and take a look back here. Now we got Asterix. All right, so this is our guy Asterix. He is getting now my 21 second, which was Trey Lance. Okay, so he wants to come up and get Trey Lance. At this point, for me anyway, Trey Lance is a guy that I'm, I'd say definitely pretty bullish on. RIP, but like I wasn't really looking to at this time, given the fact that he was young. I viewed him as a guy that was going to sit anyway. He wasn't really someone I'm eager to get off of in this quarterback horde, unless someone's going to really pay up for him. So I ended up getting Asterisk to send me as well his 22 first and 23 first and his 23 second. So 2 first and a second for the 203, I believe it was, for Trey Lance. Okay, so that's that trade there. So I'm just kind of piling up picks now. Cody is back for more. What's up, Cody? Roster Baiter. He gets my 2021 fourth, which I believe, that would have been Tannehill, I'm pretty sure. So he gets Tannehill there. And then I get for Tannehill, this one's, it's at this point, like the prices, I'm starting to able to get a little bit more juice out of each time, because like if you look at this, right? Now he gets the quarterback, right? That's why this is looking kind of crazy. And I want to go through it because it's not going to say the players clear as day, because a lot of times the people are trading for the pick that became the player. But the 23 first and the 23 second, I'm netting to go down from the 4th to the 6th round and get another player that I can basically now try to trade away that player's value or keep on my team. So I'm also netting a lot of, in best ball, positive assets. So you got, and while doing it, I'm getting all the future from these guys in their next, year or two. Here we go. HorseDick.MPEG. Man, HorseDick.MPEG. Definitely a blast from the past name in this league. I almost forgot he was in it. So we got a 22 first and a 23 first I'm getting here now for the 2021 fifth. Now this was Jalen Hurts. And at the time, Jalen Hurts was very polarizing. People were not necessarily sold on his arm and if he's going to be able to do it in the long-term picture. This ended up being a good deal for him, but now I'm getting his 22 first and 23 first. So I'm getting multiple years out too. So there's going to be this, down the road, you can kind of see it, but I'm getting multiple firsts from each one of these players. So now Memo is back for more, but he doesn't have any future firsts, and I wasn't necessarily locked into taking 2024 picks. I end up going ahead and going down the road of taking 2024 picks because at this point I know that I can use them, even though I don't have to draft the 2024 class. I know that I can start to use them and leverage those picks later. So he gets me here. Let's see. I receive a 22 third and a 23 third. That's where I'm going from the 13th down to the 16th, but I get 2 future thirds of his liquidity as well. All right, so Melo has to get into the mix. Melo, I know you don't like me anymore. It's okay. Fine. It's all right. I still love you, okay? Even if you don't love me. So, especially, I love talking about this trade. 23 first, 23 second, and a 22 second, as well as a 2021 11th round pick. But I'm sending him now a 6th, which I believe was Mac Jones, if I recall. And then a 14th round, which was, a player that he was able to use, but definitely didn't. He had to tear down from the 11th to the 14th. That's a 1st and 2 seconds for Mac Jones. And I remember at the time, people didn't necessarily felt like I got all the juice out of the lemon when it came to Melo in that trade. But listen, we're here. It was the overall process. And I wasn't trying to necessarily get every single person to pay out the nose so that they had to feel it as much as, maybe someone will typically do in a quarterback horde. Ultimately, for me, I wanted to definitely get as much as I could as far as value goes. I'm not going to act like I didn't, but the whole idea was to make sure that I'm implementing now that I have the momentum and people are starting to feel this like quarterback horde, and the dominoes have already started to fall. So people are starting to buy into buying the quarterbacks. I want to make sure that I see this through as much as possible. So at this point now, I get a couple more thirds. I send away Tyler Conklin in a 4th. Like these are pretty easy trades for me to make at this point. Asterisk backs for more. And this one is just interesting to see this, okay? Now, this is much later on in the season. This was an error, all right? This was an error that I made, but I wanted to highlight this for you too. So this is later on. I think this is actually like towards the end of the year or even the playoffs were happening. But I end up trying to get Trey Lance back now, right? Asterisk, of course, one of the teams that sent away his future, but didn't have a future without it because he didn't have a current present. He was not making the playoffs. So these are like earlier picks. So I end up giving him back his 22 first and his 22 second. Or sorry, that's my 22 second, but that's an early pick, right? So he's getting, I think it was like the 102 and the 201. Crazy for Trey Lance. I bought back into Trey Lance. So I told him if you want to get your picks back, this is what it's going to cost. So that was October 13th after he, what is that? That's a month and change in. He's like, all right, I'm out. Got to bow out. Melo, at this point, I don't know that was, I think sometimes they do this wrong. That was not actually the 101 because I earned the 101, but I had Teddy Bridgewater, one of the few pieces left on my team that I still had. I was liquidating every single piece of the quarterback values that I could. You don't have to necessarily go through all these trades, but the point is overall there, right? Oh my gosh, look at this. Look at this. Cam Akers for a first. Man, and you look at that team that I had, right? In this trade, both of these trades, I went against process to get players that I liked that absolutely killed me. And these are, I'm pretty sure the Horst Dick.MPEG pick was like top 6. So bad trade and going against the process that I was trying to implement, but still didn't like kill the overall process because there's some wiggle room. You don't have to win every single trade as long as you're overall netting total positive. But those definitely set me back some from where I should have been able to go. And if I was just totally listening to the process, I don't make that dumbass trade. Maybe I do. It's me. Anyway, so then I get, stuff like this, right? Alex Collins for a 210 because, people now, they don't have any future draft capital, and any type of players that I have on my team is basically like, the waiver wire plus. You just got to find a way to get it off my team. So I get that from Melo. Make sure I click that one again just so he sees it. Then I get, just a bunch of little trades like this. And there was 23 trades overall I make there. But if you look at my team, okay, and I'll just show you what it was at this point. Like Trey Lance, it didn't matter. He wasn't even playing. But like look at Keyshawn Vaughn. Now these guys, you may not know, going back to 2021 if they were playing. I can tell you that they weren't. And Akers had torn his Achilles. Trey Lance was sitting. Like, this team was terrible. Like, this team was honestly like Rico Dowdle's on this team, but nobody's literally even suiting up for the most part. No one's getting any type of meaningful reps. Actually, at one point, I remember looking back at what is it called? The Dynasty GM tool, and not being able to see a single player registered. I wanted to make sure they were all gone. So, like, I stripped this team down to its core, and then the whole idea is eventually going to be at what point now, right? When you look back at this, at what point do you start to try to push in the value, and how do you get this team that's literally has nothing to become, relevant in some capacity? So let's go ahead and go back to the 2022 year. So this is the second season of the total nuclear rebuild, where I start to, try to eventually pivot into a different type of team build. Now, here's the 2022 year, and this is, again, I'm trying to highlight a combination of the things that I did well, as well as the things that, like, you look back, what was I doing? So in this year, right, in this rebuild, I'm basically of the mindset that a lot of these picks that I'm going to have, or the young players, like I at this point, there's a combination of two things. One, I thought that the picks and the players were just going to be, people that I wanted to build around. So like Trey Lance and Cam Akers, obviously they fit the bill, but also I had stripped everything out of my team. Like at this point, you're just buying whatever scraps I have left that are just, more valuable to you than what the waiver wire has to offer. So I literally make 2 trades in the entire 2022 season. And oh my goodness, you don't like to see this. Breece Hall and Trey McBride. I am getting I'm sending away Breece Hall and Trey McBride for corpses of Rashad Bateman, Malik Willis, and Drake London. I can tell you, JCap, that at this point it was pre-NFL draft, and I thought Malik Willis was going to be going a lot higher than he did. RIP. So now at this point, Mike is trying to get Cam Akers and whatever else value that I had on my team. So he sends me a 25-second Kadarius Toney, Javonte Williams. I believe that was after he got injured. He buys back Cam Akers, Tyler Algier, Mo Alley Cox, and Geno Smith. And at this point, what is this? Probably October. Yeah, October 3rd. I've got nothing. My team is completely void of talent. And I probably tried to pick up, players off the wire and trade them, but they weren't going to go for draft picks. And honestly, I already kind of like soaked up all the draft pick value to be had in there. Right. So if you just take a look at this team, all right, I'll just give you kind of an idea. I believe in this league, I had 9 of the 12 future first from the teams out there, and basically for both 2022 and 2023. So if you take a look here, I'm starting to get a little more value from players that ultimately flop, but I'm looking at going into the 2023 year. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I got 9 first through Untitled 2. That's asterisks. And then I have all these seconds as well, thirds, fourths. People a lot of times will think, well, how are you going to make all those draft picks? How are you going to slide them into your lineup? Literally don't worry about that. That's something if you end up having to and make all those picks, you'll figure it out. But you do not worry about that, and don't let that like deter you from doing a pick horde. So then the 2024 class, I also had several firsts as well. And if you think about that, right, this was a startup that was in 2021. So the 2024 class is so far out, and I was taking on those picks because there was a time discount for the majority of those trades that I made. So like here, I end up having, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I had 5 first at this point, but now going into the 2023 year, okay? So kind of my timeline, if everything went the way that I wanted it to, was going to be that I would rebuild completely for 2 years. And through the draft, as well as like trades, I would basically try to build myself into hopefully starting to become and show more of a contender in 2023. And basically these 2024 picks for me were baked in to go, I'd be flexible with one way or the other. I'm either at this point, not quite the competitive team that I want to be. And so I hold on to the 2024 picks, make those final draft picks, and then put those into my team. And by 2024, for sure, I'll be locked and loaded. Or, and let's say in this 2023 year, if I am competitive enough, I can start trying to push these 2024 picks into players and making the rest of my team kind of rounded out, while also inherently there's going to be some people that have kind of their team build, which they built around a startup in 2021 for the most part, or at least with the idea of trying to compete in 2021 by the 2023-2024 season. They are no longer really able to continue to do that. So let's take a look here. All right. So in general here, some things that I learned, right? So when I take a look at this overall in a vacuum, some things that I learned and did not do well, as well as things I did well. Things that I didn't do well. Like when I look at 2022, I basically cleaned out so much value in Dynasty that I didn't have really anything to trade away with. So I kind of left myself as like a sitting duck. I couldn't really do shit throughout that year. And then also just buying back into these players that I really liked. Listen, I was a Cam Akers stan, still kind of am, rooting for him, comeback player of the year off the second Achilles. But in all seriousness, just was buying into player hype that I really had no reason to, and was ahead of schedule, kind of just because I had the ability to, I think. And it was like, you look at your roster every single week in the league and you're not making any trades. So you get bored and you buy into some player hype. That and Trey Lance. I mean, now had Trey Lance become the more athletic version of like Brock Purdy or some shit, sure, maybe you say I look like a genius, but at the end of the day, those were two things that just in process didn't make sense. And I was buying into player hype that players I believed in and wanted to have on my team because I had the luxury to. Those are really dumb things to do. And then also, listen, had I not moved these quarterbacks at a certain point, I mean, that would have been a disaster had I had that happen. But I think going in with the mindset in the quarterback horde, especially in today's market, and I think for the most part there, you could look at these trades and be like, how are you getting, a first and a second or 2 firsts for some of these quarterbacks? Ultimately, those were kind of in the range, or at least somewhat in the range of what a lot of, trade calculators or people were saying quarterbacks are worth in the Superflex league like that. So I was trying to stay close to the market to get as much as I could out of the trade, but also not trying to scare away people to where they're not making a trade. See, it doesn't make sense if you're going to do that to really try to make sure you're bending people over, so to speak. Like, obviously you want to have the ability to get out of the trade a win for yourself, right? I'm not saying you can't leverage at points when, like at certain points in that quarterback horde, when multiple people had bought into the quarterbacks and now everyone else's quarterback room is looking more complete and there's a few teams that don't, maybe I have a chance there to tax them a little more. So like being sensible though, I think just making sure that you're doing what you can to extract as much value, but ultimately trying to see the process through and trade away all the quarterbacks, or at least as many as you can, so you don't get stuck with all of them. I mean, it's obviously the idea is to get as much dynasty value for your team, and you can't start all these quarterbacks even in a best ball league. So this year in 2023, now I'm kind of at this point. It's interesting. So another league that I'll go over with you, the Arkham Asylum League, in a different week. But the Arkham Asylum League and this league parallel to each other. Another thing that I looked about, like the 2023 class was supposed to be just goated, absolutely legendary. You're going to build your team around this. Well, that's not necessarily the case. There's definitely some players in 23 that you like to build your team around, but that's not anywhere near 15 unbelievable players, and that's just the cornerstones of all Dynasty teams is from the 23 class. So overbuying into the hype of 2023 would be something I think in general learning from, but also because I had the Arkham Asylum League where I did have all 12 2023 first, and then this league where I had 9, I kind of had the opportunity to really see, okay, in these 2 leagues, how do I play this, or how do I kind of experiment given what I have here, and really try to talk through some points of, okay, do you want to draft all these players? Do you want to try to build around a lot of the rookie class in 2023, which at that point we thought 2023 was going to be great. And I'm not saying that there's not a good class, but it didn't live up to the hype. And do you want to build around those guys, or do you want to try to kind of have a good blend where you still have some youth? You want to have that dynasty appeal of the younger players, but also typically, for the most part, there's only going to be a handful of rookies that really meaningful in scoring points in their rookie season. So is it better to try to pivot out of some of these draft picks? And when you do have this situation, so you're in a unique position where there are teams that just don't have their first, and they obviously didn't make the playoffs, and they probably look at next year like, man, I'm not going to be in the best position to compete. And you have picks of their own as well as other people. So now you can kind of be in a monopoly in a way, right? You're the only game in town that has multiple picks. And if they are so hell-bent on rebuilding, which a lot of them eventually do, they start to crave doing something like going to rebuild when they're not winning in this big competitive market that was created here. So at this point now, right, I now have all these picks, and I'm looking and I'm thinking, okay, in these 2 leagues, I'd like to probably see, just for the sake of argument and seeing it through, if I could probably draft more of the large majority of the picks I have in one league, which ended up being Arkham Asylum. I'm going to draft these players. And then in that left shit where I'm going to say, okay, let me try to be a little more of an aggressor. Let me see what I can do in this situation where I know some of these teams are not going to be able to compete in the current market because they don't have their picks and they didn't make the playoffs last year, possibly both years. What can I get done if I be the aggressor and try to make sure that I'm pivoting some of these young 23 picks, and now my 2024 picks, if I can do that, 2 teams that want to rebuild and get myself into a competitive team. That was the goal in the shit league. And I'll just tell you, without having to really do so, the ladder of trading away, leveraging some of these draft picks that you've built up for some players which are more secure, even if it feels a little more like an overpay, kind of basically negating some of the risk that you carry with every single one of these picks. So let me just go through here in the offseason, show you some of the trades I make now in the 2023 year, where I am at this point leaning into trying to actually build this thing into a from a pretender, not even a pretender, from a absolute dog shit team to a contender. So we go ahead and take a look at my trades here in the 2023 offseason. So you'll see here, January 20th, I'm making an L trade here where I acquired Daniel Bellinger, another RIP thing, trying to act like some of these young tight ends, which really don't even have the greatest profiles and have, a few weeks of production, very spotty production throughout the rookie season, and acting like they're going to take the huge leap into next year. Now, Trey McBride, different conversation, but also different talent. So that was an L trade. So then here, I do another tear down at this point where I get Michael Carter in the 106 for Javonte Williams. At this point, I was still pretty in on Javonte Williams. But for that trade and for that price, I went with the process over the players. Okay, so here was the first panic trade that I saw where I had so many picks in 2023, first, second, and third round, that this trade ended up in my inbox. Now, this is, again, process-wise, a smash trade. Ultimately, the results weren't the greatest because Aaron Jones had an injury-riddled year last year, and Nick Chubb, unfortunately, with a really terrible injury. But literally, I'm on the clock, and you think about what the 23 running backs in class became. I don't know. I could go through and see if any of those thirds hit. I'm pretty sure if I remember right, looking through, he took guys like Sean Tucker. I don't believe any of these picks ended up hitting, but he ends up sending me an offer, which I accept, of literally here I got 4 thirds and a 4th while on the clock that I am sending away. I've already got all these picks to draft, remember? And I go ahead and get Aaron Jones and Nick Chubb, who at the point, none of them were even close to 3rd round picks. Seconds probably don't even get it done for either one, but, early second, something like that. 4 thirds and a fourth while I'm on the clock, basically going to be drafting another player. And people eventually just got sick of seeing me draft, and this offer came into me from No Games. He's always a fun person to trade with because you never know. He's definitely about No Games, though. So that trade came in there. And then I started at this point really trying to focus and shift things into making trades that I'm actually intentionally trying to come off of picks and try to form them into players that I think are going to be meaningful. Now, again, that is not actually the 101 and the 106 that is being sent there because I won the league, and that's Raptor 1523 with the 101 pick. So those picks actually were both late, but and mulling them over, I believe, was finished in third. But so the point is, I send away Kadarius Toney and then 2 2024 first. So not even the 2023 class, right? In this draft, it's already over. So at this point, I send away 2 2024 first of the 6 I believe I had, and I get CD Lamb and Noah Fant. Now, CD Lamb started up really slow, so this didn't look the greatest at the early part of the year, but I mean, 2 first, even in best ball, and Kadarius Toney is a smash. I also got Noah Fant, who wasn't the greatest, but I'm hoping for better things this year. So that we keep going here. Let's see, we got... All right, so then here I acquire Devontae Smith and Cooper Kupp. At the time, I was really excited about this trade. Cooper Kupp, unfortunately, didn't have a great year last year. Kind of had the whole, up and down season with his injuries. But the process here was, right, trying to get off of now a first and a second for each one of these receivers. Could be looked at a little bit as an overpay, but one of them is in 2025 now. That was my 25 first. And then I'm also looking at getting off of the, a middling first and then a couple of seconds. So in best ball, it's 4 for 2 asset wise, but I'm trying to pivot off of some of these picks into players to finally shape up my team. So then at this point, another L trade where, listen, Mayer's not the greatest, and I'm hoping for better things with Pitts with Cousins, but at this point, I'm trying to fill the tight end position here, and it didn't make sense in best ball to do this. So I was trying to basically up tier from Mayer in the 111 and the 208. I was basically trying to really focus on kind of building this team, not just as a best ball roster, but I was kind of in the position to be, with the luxury of all the picks that I had, not just build it into a really deep team, but a top heavy and deep team. So I was trying to build out Kyle Pitts into my tight end stud. Not the smartest of move, but at least here, I believe it was this trade with Mr. Wonderful. So then I end up getting Cody. Finally, Cody caves, and he is a guy that never wants to rebuild. So I finally got him in the position. I've been rebuilding in a lot of these different teams. He tells me all I can do is rebuild, yada, yada. We ended up having a tie in one league after he said that. But point is, I end up getting him to finally cave and go ahead and get the draft picks that he needs to reset his team. And I go for the hammers, right? So I want Josh Allen. I want Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, Isaiah Pacheco, and Tyler Lockett. So I get those guys. I send him, oh man, RIP. Quentin Johnson, Zach Charbonnet, Trey Lance. So Trey Lance, we already know what that is. He was at least something middling or trying to, build around a name cachet. But then Charbs and Quentin Johnson, really poor rookie seasons. And then I sent away Melo's first, which I know ended up being earlier, 104, 103, 102, whatever it was. Another first, and then 2 seconds. And this was one of those where, man, I made sure that to rebuild, Roster Bader felt that one. He felt that one pretty nice and good. Okay, so then we go to the next part here, where at this point I'm trading with J-Cap, who he kind of handpicked and told me he was looking to get Pitts and Bateman. So he kind of helped me save myself from the Pitts trade. And this is where I start really to lock in, I think, a team that's ready to go and really getting to be pretty deep. So I get A.J. Brown. Irv Smith was really just a piece of the deal that I could have cared less about. I've never been really overly in on Irv Smith. And then Trey McBride. So I get A.J. Brown, Trey McBride, and Irv Smith. I send away Pitts, Bateman, and Downs. So that was definitely a very big trade for me. And then at this point, so let's see, we're now, that was all the offseason trades, right? So now we're into the season. I make this trade here. Definitely not the greatest of moves, but at this point, I'm just not trying to hold the Nick Chubb 0 for the entire season. Look back at it, I think the process was right. The player was not. For Khalil Herbert, I'm trying to just get anything for Nick Chubb. Unfortunately, that injury looked really bad, but I didn't get enough there. So I get off of Nick Chubb for the Khalil Herbert there. Then I'm getting, at this point, another bad trade, I would say. Now, it ended up helping me because Alvin Kamara and James Conner both, were really good down the stretch. But I ended up coming off of the 204 and as well as Trey McBride. So like that one, it felt like I definitely didn't execute to the highest degree, but at the same point, it really doesn't matter necessarily. Even though I have a terrible tight end, Trey McBride would have been awesome on this team. You know, the whole process here is kind of getting my team shaped around the correct roster construction. And I needed a lot more running backs that were, you know, unfortunately they're crusty, but they're older and they're going to score points for me. So I ended up making that trade there. Cool, Herbert finish. We already got over that. So the no games now. I'm acquiring Jake Browning. This is just a gross trade where, you know, Jake Browning at this point, no one really still believes, and I'm not saying that you should, but he ended up being pretty usable in best ball. And as you saw, I had a Rich injury and Kirk Cousins, so I needed to do something, and I was not willing to bend the knee, but that was really all that I had, right? So all those trades now, that's a lot of trades actually, believe it or not, in all these different years, other than 2022. But the whole point is there, I was basically, in the early part of the startup, I went from a quarterback horde into a, you know, at this point, trying to play the game of you guys are all going to compete against each other. And once you have enough draft picks and people are locked into competing, and there's only one store in town as the rebuilder, you kind of created a monopoly situation where you can manipulate the prices that you want to dictate in the market. So overall, that's kind of what I wanted to show you here. And I just want to talk through a few more things here with you. All right, so overall there, when you take a look at that, right, there's a lot of different trades there, a lot of different things that I think I could have executed a lot better. But when you take a look at overall the points there, things to keep in mind at good takeaways and bad takeaways when I look at this as a whole. I mean, the fact that I have so many bad takeaways and I built that team, I think it should show to you that in a rebuild, if you don't have to, I'm not telling you have to go into a rebuild for the record, okay? But if you go into a rebuild, a lot of it, I think it's hard to in the moment, right? Being prisoner of the moment is one of the hardest parts about it. I mean, I made the trade for Trey Lance. A lot of these things are just in the moment watching football, wanting to get players that you're seeing do well. So even though I had a process that I was being like, I kind of had a handle of what I was planning to do and how it was going to look, at least to a degree, but you don't know until you start seeing it through. And even me having that process and understanding the players and the players, you know, not over the process, basically process over players, I still couldn't adhere to that to the entire time. So understanding that's going to be one of the things you have to go against with yourself in a full nuclear rebuild like this, but it doesn't have to take as long as you might think. When you take a look at that team that I pulled up for you after year one, I mean, there's literally nothing on that team. It's absolutely zero, and this is over 30 roster spots in a best ball league. You look at then, you know, kind of starting to get some younger players, which a lot of those didn't even necessarily hit. They weren't the greatest players, but they had some dynasty value, starting to build out the team. And then going into the 2023 class, I drafted a lot of those players in the first and second round. And then also at the same time was trying to move in afterwards and beforehand 2023 picks and 2024 picks to really start leveraging out all of those draft picks, which you've been holding, which are now accruing a ton of value. And you're going to be trading them into a bunch of teams that realistically, there's going to be some that are not really looking that good for competing into next year. And the more you do this, your leverage is basically now the combination of having the draft picks that they need and no one else has them in multitude, but also every single time you make a trade like that, your team's starting to look scarier and scarier. And these teams are not really looking to, you know, without a team that's actually that good relative to what the teams were last year, try to compete with that type of a juggernaut. So that's an extreme example. Okay. I'm not going to act like it's not, but the point of the exercise here, I think, is to think about you don't have to win every trade. You can do a lot of bonehead trades and still end up way ahead in Dynasty. But that if you go into a startup being flexible, I didn't go in with the mindset of that from the jump. But then as it became more and more clear that I'm going to start quarterback hoarding, okay, I'm being flexible and open to the fact that I'm not going to be probably competing in this league. And at a certain point, I see how thirsty everyone is to win. I'm going to go ahead and just bow out. You guys can have it for a couple years. I'll figure out how to clean this up and, you know, go ahead and win later. I'll say when we go ahead and pull up some other teams, like it's not always this clean and this great of a team that you build in a rebuild. You can definitely screw up some things in a rebuild. So I want to walk through some things that I think are important to think about that can help you avoid a lot of really dumb shit that you can do in a rebuild. Trying to trade for, you know, the wrong players, using picks and kind of not leveraging them appropriately. But if you do it right, that's an extreme example of going ahead and taking all the players on your team, liquidating them into picks, and then literally only in 2 years forming an absolute goon squad. So I just want to make sure if you're thinking about rebuilding, you're not sure if you should, if you're feeling like you need to, you're not really sure how you're going to get it done, And when you look at the team, it just looks like, oh my gosh, this team is so bad. This is going to take forever. It's going to take years and years and years. If you kind of just think about some of the principles and processes we talk about and really start to try to execute them one at a time, not trying to get too far ahead of your skis, you can get there a lot quicker than you think. So let me know what you think of this video overall. Brian probably has a ton of editing to do to kind of cut out some stuff. Give you some screen share and just overall thoughts. I'll see you back here, same time, same place next week. I'm out of here. Peace.